Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ice-Burgh To Go, your daily dose of Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Inside the Penguins or anywhere you get your podcast from. The only news and analysis to discuss today is that the Penguins have officially been eliminated from playoff contention in the 2023-24 season. Their year comes to an end as they compete in and complete Game 82 tonight against the New York Islanders. And that's because both the Red Wings and the Capitals got jobs done yesterday, officially eliminating the Pens. And when you look back at it, man, the Penguins got no help over the last 3 days that there was actually games in the wild card to be played. Saturday, everything went against the Penguins. Monday, everything went against the Penguins. And obviously Tuesday, everything went against the Penguins. The only thing that went in their favor was they were able to beat the Nashville Predators on Monday and keep their hopes alive. But hey, we'll get to that in a little bit about whether or not they were deserving of the 8th and final playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. But instead, that spot goes to the Washington Capitals, and they'll take on the President's Trophy winning New York Rangers in the first round of the playoffs. But as you would expect, last night, for everybody watching, there's 4 fan bases whose playoff hopes hung in the balance: the Capitals, the Flyers, the Penguins, and the Detroit Red Wings. And it was hectic. It was not a anxiety-free 4 hours for anybody on any of those 4 fan bases. But it all started with the fact that Kelly Sutherland was refereeing the Capitals versus Flyers game. And Sutherland and the Penguins, they just simply don't mix. And he really put his stamp on this one early on. The Philadelphia Flyers take a shot on a rush. It hits off of Charlie Lindgren and goes straight up. But Sutherland thinks that he has it pinned against his pads. The whistle blows. The puck falls down onto the ice and into the net. And it's a 1-goal lead for the Philadelphia Flyers, except Sutherland lost sight of the puck. The play was blown dead, and the Capitals get lucky. The Flyers don't get lucky, and transversely, the Penguins don't get lucky. So instead of a 1-0 lead for the Flyers, it is 0-0. A little bit later in the first, a puck deflects off of Alex Ovechkin's left pec into the net, and the Capitals get a 1-0 lead through the first period. And if you've watched any of their hockey, the one thing they've learned how to do is be the New York Islanders of 2024. They know how to shut things down. That's the reason they won 2-0 on Monday night. It's the reason they held the Boston Bruins to 16 shots on goal. I do think the Bruins could have put up a little bit more of a fight in that game, but nonetheless, you do have to give some credit to the Washington Capitals. But 1-0 in Philly, in the opposite direction that it should have been. Meanwhile, in Montreal, the Habs blow a 3-1 lead, making it 3-3. Daniel Sprong ties it up late in the period, or early in the third period, and then late in the third period, the Habs retake the lead with about 7 minutes left. And the reason that's important is that gave the Flyers life. And if you asked John Tortorella, which reporters did after the game, they did have an eye on what was happening in Montreal between the Canadiens and the Detroit Red Wings. And the Flyers needed a regulation win to have a chance. So the fact that the door was open for the Red Wings to lose and the Flyers to win in regulation to get back into a playoff spot and have it all depend on the Pittsburgh Penguins tonight, that was not a good thing for the Pens' chances. Instead, the Red Wings tie it with about 3 seconds left, tying it at 4-4 and essentially ending the Flyers' playoff chances. No less than 3 minutes later, in real time, John Tortorella, unaware of this, pulls his goalie in a tie game with less than 5 minutes to go. Instead, TJ Oshie scores the empty netter. Tortorella pulled his goalie for nothing, and the Capitals end up winning and taking that final spot. Now, did it matter in the end? No, because the Detroit Red Wings came back and actually won that game. Patrick Kane scores in the shootout winner. But in that instance, if Tortorella knew that that game was going into overtime and the Flyers were essentially eliminated already, maybe he doesn't pull the goalie, and maybe the Philadelphia Flyers, with a full 5 players and a goalie on the ice, get the win there. And then maybe, just maybe, the Canadiens win in overtime. But none of that happened. In fact, the opposite happened. TJ Oshie does get the empty netter. The Capitals do win. The Red Wings come back and they win the game anyway. So none of it matters in the end, except for the fact that Caps won, Red Wings won, Pens are done. So that makes tonight's game meaningless for the Penguins. The second time in a row that the final game of the season came down like this, where the Penguins they lost last year, where the Penguins, the day before their last game, needed some things to bounce in their favor to make the last game meaningful, to make the last game a win and you're in scenario. And instead, the Montreal Canadiens, for the second straight year, let them down. And it's going to be a meaningless game where they could potentially finish 1 point outside of a playoff spot with a win tonight on Long Island. It's deja vu. It's not the ending that anybody wanted. Last year when it happened, big changes came. This year, there might be big changes. I suspect they're going to be in a much different fashion than they were last season. But at the end of the day, the final story is Penguins will miss the playoffs for a second consecutive season. Now, before we go, I do want to get into this word deserved, because that word has been tossed around. We talked about it a little bit yesterday on Tip of the Iceberg Live, as well as Tip of the Iceberg with Horwat. And the word deserved has been thrown around a lot, online and otherwise. I don't think they deserved a playoff spot. They didn't. Because the first 68 games, they were far from a team that deserved to even be in the race. And they weren't a team that was in the race. Yeah, they said that there's still a chance, and Money Puck had at that point given them a 1% chance. But they were 9 points out of a playoff spot with 13 games to go, 12 games to go. They weren't a team that anybody was thinking was going to go on this run. And I said on this show, they're going to have to basically win out just to get into the conversation. And well, they basically won out. They're 8-1-3 to this point since that day. And they're in the conversation, but it wasn't enough to get them over the hump. They've lost one game in regulation in the last 3 weeks. Do you take anything away from them? No, you can't. You can't take anything away from the 8-1-3 record that they've had since March 24th, which is the best in the National Hockey League in that span. And it's more impressive when you look into it a little deeper and look at the fact that they are 5-1-2 against teams that are preparing to start their playoffs this weekend. 5-1-2 against playoff teams in pretty much all must-win scenarios for the Penguins. And in a lot of those instances, those other teams didn't have their fate sealed, didn't have their positioning sealed. And then also 2-0-0 against other wildcard teams that didn't make it, the Detroit Red Wings and the New Jersey Devils. An impressive stretch, no less. Led the league in goals with 50, by the way. So again, you can't take anything away from them in that stretch. But they're still, even with that stretch, among the worst in the National Hockey League in holding third period leads, allowing shorthanded goals, scoring power play goals, which has been a story since game one. It's been a story since training camp when they first started practicing the power play, and allowing odd man rushes. One of the worst teams in the league at giving up odd man rushes. I'm sure I'm missing plenty of other things. People are going to bring up coaching. People are going to bring up timely goaltending. But those four right there alone, holding third period leads for the second consecutive season, allowing shorthanded goals, that goes on a lot of players on the Penguins power play, but directly on a couple of core guys. Erik Karlsson, Evgeny Malkin, and Chris Letang. A lot of them, it's because of their mistakes at the top of the paint, at the top of the zone, excuse me. So too many shorthanded goals allowed, leading the league in that category, actually. Power play has been a question mark all season long, and even with this little stretch here, the Penguins were ranked 25th since March 24th on the power play. They still are converting about only 14%. Does it look a lot better? Yes. It looks much better and has looked much better over the last couple of weeks. The results still aren't there. And that's, to me, the first order of business. We'll get into what the future of this team is in later episodes. We have 6 months now until the start of the 2024-25 season. We have plenty to dive into over the coming weeks to kind of break down and parcel out what happened this season and what should happen this offseason as the Stanley Cup playoffs get underway and we follow those along as well. But the first order of business to fix the power play, you got to get rid of the power play coach. And I think that everybody agrees that that is a piece of business that might have already needed to be done, but it certainly should be the first order of business in the offseason. Now, I don't want to end this all negatively. Of course, they missed the playoffs. That's not a good thing. But I do want to mention one overwhelming positive. There's more than those in the last 3 weeks. There's been a lot of positives over the last 3 weeks, one of which is the fact that they came up off the mat and almost pulled off a historic comeback to make the playoffs. You cannot take that away from them. The other thing I want to mention is the Penguins' core. Big topic of conversation. The core three or the core four, or whoever you see as the core, Kyle Dubas seems to have Erik Karlsson firmly supplanted in there with the core three of Crosby, Malkin, and Letang. What they showed over this last 3-week stretch is that they can carry a team in big moments still. At 36, 37, 38, and then there's Erik Karlsson at 33. They showed that they can still play at an elite level to take over games and to carry what had been a carcass of a team back into playoff contention. Sidney Crosby has 23 points over the last 12 games, and he has accounted for 46% of the Penguins' offense in that time. He's been nothing short of spectacular. You compare it to what he did last season. We all said it was an un-Crosby-esque finish to the season, especially at a time when the Penguins needed him most. He scored 10 points in 14 games, and you said, well, it was all right, but you expect more from Crosby. This is what you get. This is what you expected. You can't ask Crosby to do much more than what he did here in the last 3 weeks. 23 points, 46% of the Penguins' offense. A ridiculous showing by the 36-year-old that is going to go down on the Mount Rushmore and finish likely. He's on pace for it, for the pace that I set, but finish likely in the top 5 in all-time scoring. Right now, firmly supplanted in the top 10 after this season's work. But also, you got to look at Evgeny Malkin. 12 games, 12 points. He resurrected his season in a big way. Surprise, surprise, as soon as he got a good, capable winger in Michael Bunting, a winger that unlocks the rest of the line. Because it's not just, hey, Michael Bunting worked, they had chemistry. They unlocked Rickard Rakell. Rickard Rakell played his best hockey down these last 3 weeks of the entire season. And a big part of that is because Malkin stepped up more. And a big part of that is because the insertion of a guy like Michael Bunting and what he opens up because of the way he plays. So Evgeny Malkin, a point per game over this 12-game stretch. Erik Karlsson, 9 points. And I think what I've said multiple times is if you look at his defense over the last 9 games, 12 games, they've been good. He's been better. He hasn't been great. And don't get me wrong, if the Capitals would have lost that game last night and the Penguins would have missed out on the playoffs by 1 point to the Detroit Red Wings, he'd have a goose on his face and an egg on his face because it would have been his fault. That's the direct correlation, is giving up the pity point last week to Detroit and losing by 1 point to Detroit in the playoff race. That would have been on him. Now, at the end of the day, it didn't matter. At the end of the day, there's way more instances where the Penguins could have picked up that 1 more point to pull even with these teams and to potentially get into the playoffs on the strength of their tiebreaker schedule, which is regulation wins, which the Penguins had over every other team in the race. But 9 points in 12 games, better defense, but he still had his moments where, I said it last week, his controller died. He made a boneheaded play. He made a horrific turnover. There's a lot of instances where that happened. Same too with Chris Letang. But again, 11 points in 12 games. There were some moments that Chris Letang really stepped up for the Penguins. There were also some moments where he was really detrimental for the Penguins. But at the end of the day, their backs were against the wall. I'm interested to see how those guys respond to start next season with a clean slate, with a fresh slate, and hopefully with a better team around them. That one lies on Kyle Dubas. But like I mentioned, we'll talk about everything that needs to happen, everything that should happen, everything that could happen this offseason as the next couple of weeks unfold. First order of business. Sorry, Todd Reardon. I think it should probably be over for the assistant coach after 4 years coming back to the Pittsburgh Penguins. But for now, that's going to do it for this episode of Ice-Burgh To Go. The Penguins season comes to an end later tonight in a meaningless game against the New York Islanders. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Inside the Penguins or anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll be back tomorrow with a full episode and a full postmortem of the 2023-24 Pittsburgh Penguins. We'll see you guys there.